I had a happy 3-year marriage with my wife Sarah in Phoenix. As a 36-year-old teacher, everything was going well. Until my mother-in-law, Mrs. Henderson, came to live with us. At first she seemed helpful, but then Sarah's behavior toward me began to change. Our fights increased and Sarah grew cold toward me. Mrs. Henderson was constantly whispering things in her ear. 6 months later, Sarah filed for divorce. What Mrs. Henderson didn't know was that the home security cameras had recorded her every conversation. My name is Jason Walker. I teach in the northern part of Phoenix in Desert Ridge at Desert Canyon High School. I'm a 6th grade math teacher and have been doing this job with love for 13 years. My students love me very much and parents are satisfied with my performance. The reason I chose this profession is to instill a love of mathematics in children and make a positive difference in their lives. I met Sarah 4 years ago at a friend's wedding. At that time, Sarah was working as a nurse at Mercy Medical Center. She was working in the emergency room, and despite working in very difficult conditions, she loved her job. Sarah was 32 years old, with long brown hair, green eyes, and a very cheerful face. We fell in love at first sight. As we got to know each other, we discovered how compatible we were. We were both honest and hard-working people who valued family values. Sarah's compassion and understanding enchanted me. I also tried to reduce the stress in her life and support her. After dating for a year, we decided to get married. Our wedding took place at Desert Botanical Garden. It was a small but very meaningful ceremony. Sarah was very beautiful that day and we were both very happy. We spent our honeymoon in Sedona. We hiked among the red rocks and made plans for our future. In those days we could never have predicted that Mrs. Henderson would ruin our lives. The first 3 years of our marriage were truly very happy. Sarah and I agreed on everything. We had similar values and goals. We loved hiking together to South Mountain on weekends. Watching the beautiful views of Phoenix and being in touch with nature relaxed us. In the evenings we watched movies at home, cooked together and shared our day. Sarah was a very supportive wife. When I had difficult days at school, when I dealt with problem students, she always comforted me. I was also there for her during her stressful days at the hospital. When they lost patients in the emergency room, Sarah would be very upset. At those times I would hug her and tell her everything would pass. We worked like a real team. Our financial situation was also good. When our 2 salaries combined, we lived a comfortable life. We had bought a beautiful house in the Ahwatukee area. It had 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and a beautiful garden. Sarah loved gardening. She grew plants suitable for Arizona's desert climate. I also helped her on weekends. We were planning to have children. Sarah wanted to wait until she was 35 so she could be more stable in her career. She had been promoted at the hospital and was now working as a charge nurse. This position brought more responsibility, but Sarah was very successful at her job. She was loved by patients and colleagues. What I knew about Sarah's family was limited. Her father, Richard Henderson, was a retired police officer. He was a very calm and understanding man. He loved Sarah very much and accepted me as a member of the family. Her mother, Margaret Henderson, was a different character. She was a retired teacher and someone who loved to control a lot. Mrs. Henderson lived in Sacramento. She rarely came to Phoenix. We only met once or twice a year. She was always distant towards me. She never treated me warmly. Sarah said this was due to Mrs. Henderson's character. It would take time for me to get used to it. 2 years ago, Richard Henderson died of a heart attack. This was a huge shock for Mrs. Henderson. In their 40-year marriage, they had never been apart. Richard's death deeply shook Mrs. Henderson. She became depressed and withdrew from her social life. Sarah was very worried about her mother's condition. Mrs. Henderson's health was getting worse. Her aging-related problems were increasing. She was having trouble living alone. She couldn't do housework, couldn't take her medications regularly. Sarah talked to her mother every week and checked her condition. Mrs. Henderson constantly said she was lonely. Last February, Mrs. Henderson's condition became critical. She had fallen at home and remained on the floor for hours. Her neighbor found her and took her to the hospital. Sarah immediately flew to Sacramento and stayed with her mother. It was obvious that Mrs. Henderson could no longer live alone. There were options for nursing home or living with family. Sarah didn't want to put Mrs. Henderson in a nursing home. She loved her mother very much and wanted her to be with her. She talked to me and suggested bringing Mrs. Henderson to Phoenix. I was hesitant at first. Mrs. Henderson and I had never gotten along well. But Sarah really wanted it, and I wanted to make my wife happy. Mrs. Henderson came to Phoenix at the beginning of March. We had prepared the third bedroom for her. She had brought her own belongings and personalized the room. Sarah was very happy. Having her mother near her gave her peace of mind. I also tried to treat Mrs. Henderson as respectfully as I could. The first week everything went normally. Mrs. Henderson lived quietly in the house. She wasn't around too much. She had breakfast in the morning and watched television during the day. When Sarah went to work, she was comfortable knowing her mother was nearby. When I returned from school, I also had polite conversations with Mrs. Henderson. The second week, Mrs. Henderson relaxed a bit more. She began helping Sarah with housework. She loved cooking and prepared meals for us. Sarah was very pleased. With her mother's help, housework became easier. I also said I liked Mrs. Henderson's meals. But from the third week onwards, I started noticing strange things. Mrs. Henderson was having too many private conversations with Sarah. When I approached, they would lower their voices and change the subject. This seemed a bit strange, but maybe it was normal mother-daughter chat. Mrs. Henderson's true character began to emerge in mid-April. She was constantly asking Sarah questions. She was curious about everything about our marriage, our money, our future plans. Sarah initially considered these questions normal. But I felt that Mrs. Henderson had a hidden agenda. Mrs. Henderson's first warning sign came at the beginning of May. That evening when I came home from school, I found Sarah crying in the kitchen. She looked very sad. When I asked why, I learned that Mrs. Henderson had told her worrying things about our marriage. Mrs. Henderson had told Sarah that I didn't love her enough. This accusation surprised me very much. I showed Sarah that I loved her every day. I brought her flowers, prepared romantic dinners, told her how special she was at every opportunity. It was very unfair for Mrs. Henderson to say such a thing. I tried to explain to Sarah that Mrs. Henderson was wrong. That evening Sarah and I talked for a long time. Sarah said her mother was worried but wrong. She repeated that she loved me and was happy. I also thought that Mrs. Henderson might be in an adjustment period. Getting used to living in a new home could take time. We decided we needed to be patient. At the end of May, Mrs. Henderson began to become more aggressive. She started making Sarah question my spending habits. She said I spent too much money and bought unnecessary things. This was completely wrong. I was someone who spent very carefully. We planned our budget with Sarah and everything was under control. In June, things got even worse. Mrs. Henderson started constantly telling Sarah negative things about me. Sarah told me that Mrs. Henderson was criticizing me. Mrs. Henderson said I was careless about cleaning. She claimed that I didn't fold laundry properly and didn't wash dishes well. These accusations were completely unfair. I did half of the housework at home. When Sarah came home tired from work, I did my best to help her. It was obvious that Mrs. Henderson was trying to slander me. But I couldn't understand why she was doing this. Mrs. Henderson was acting very cleverly. She was never rude to me face to face. In fact, she seemed very kind when she was around me. She said good morning and asked how I was. But when she was alone with Sarah, she spoke poisonous words. This hypocrisy was very disturbing. Sarah was caught in this situation and didn't know what to do. On one hand, she wanted to listen to her mother. She loved Mrs. Henderson and didn't want to upset her. On the other hand, she trusted me and knew Mrs. Henderson was wrong. Being caught in the middle of this dilemma put Sarah under a lot of stress. Our first big fight broke out in July. Sarah told me I needed to take more responsibility at home. Under Mrs. Henderson's influence, she began criticizing me. I was very surprised by this situation because I was already doing my best at home. I was cooking, cleaning, doing laundry, and supporting Sarah in every way. After this fight, Sarah began to distance herself from me. She wasn't as warm as before. There was physical distance between us when we watched television in the evenings. While we used to sit on the same side of the couch, now we sat in opposite corners. Mrs. Henderson noticed this change, and I could see satisfaction sparkling in her eyes. In August, I began to understand Mrs. Henderson's real plan. Sarah was constantly talking to her mother and complaining about me. Mrs. Henderson had started suggesting that Sarah leave me. She wasn't saying it directly yet, but she was implying it. She emphasized how difficult our marriage was and how problematic I was. Sarah was initially opposed to these suggestions. She told Mrs. Henderson that she loved me and didn't want to separate. But Mrs. Henderson was very insistent and patient. She was injecting a little more poison every day. She was systematically brainwashing Sarah. During this process, Sarah's trust in me was decreasing. In September, the situation became unbearable. Sarah had almost stopped talking to me. We only talked about mandatory subjects. Even courtesy expressions like good morning and good night had decreased. Mrs. Henderson acted as if she were a queen in the house. She influenced all of Sarah's decisions, and Sarah didn't do anything without consulting her. At this point, I decided to take action to defend myself. I needed to learn what Mrs. Henderson was telling Sarah. But it was impossible to listen to them because they were constantly having private conversations. I needed to find a solution. At this point, I decided to install a home security system. I contacted the security company and said I wanted to install a comprehensive camera system in our home. I cited security reasons. Burglary incidents were increasing in Phoenix, and I wanted to protect our home. Sarah supported this idea because we really had security concerns. A company called Desert Security Solutions came to our house and installed the system. They placed cameras in the living room, kitchen, hallway, and entrance door. We didn't install cameras in bedrooms and bathrooms because they were private areas. The system was very advanced, and I could watch live from the phone app. After the security system was installed, I waited to learn the truth. The first week, Mrs. Henderson behaved normally. Maybe she was suspicious of the cameras. But the second week, after Sarah argued with me, I saw Mrs. Henderson's true face. The cameras recorded Mrs. Henderson saying very bad things about me to Sarah. I was shocked while watching the recordings. Mrs. Henderson was telling Sarah that I was cheating on her. This was a completely false accusation. I loved Sarah very much and would never think of betraying her. Mrs. Henderson also claimed that I was spending my money on gambling. This was also a completely fabricated accusation. Mrs. Henderson was telling lies very systematically. Every day she was making up new scenarios to raise doubts in Sarah's mind. She was using psychological tactics to shake Sarah's trust. Being so calculated and malicious horrified me. In October, Mrs. Henderson's plan went even further. She told Sarah that I might use violence. This was a very dangerous lie. I have never used violence against anyone and never will. But Mrs. Henderson had planted this doubt in Sarah's mind. Sarah began to worry about this and feared me more. This tactic of Mrs. Henderson was very effective. Sarah now felt uncomfortable being in the same room with me. When I raised my voice, she was very scared. Even in normal arguments, Sarah would back away. Mrs. Henderson was successfully building a wall of fear between us. In November, Mrs. Henderson's influence reached its peak. Sarah no longer wanted to sleep in the same bed with me. She started staying in the guest room. This situation was extremely bad for our marriage. Mrs. Henderson was very pleased with this situation. Her plan was working perfectly. Sarah had completely come under her control. During this process, Sarah's character had completely changed. Sarah, who used to be cheerful and happy, now looked tense and unhappy. When she came home from work, she was tired and stressed. She was crushed under Mrs. Henderson's constant pressure. But she couldn't realize this because the manipulation was so skillful. In December, Sarah started meeting with a divorce lawyer. Mrs. Henderson had recommended a good lawyer in Phoenix, and Sarah had accepted. Our marriage was now coming to an end. Mrs. Henderson was reaping the fruits of her patient 6-month plan. Sarah had decided to leave me while completely under her influence. After Sarah met with the lawyer, she talked to me. She said our marriage was over and she wanted a divorce. She cited our incompatible characters as the reason. What Mrs. Henderson had said about me had become real in Sarah's mind. She said she didn't know me and had married the wrong person. This conversation shook me very much. Our happy 3-year marriage was disappearing because of Mrs. Henderson's lies. Sarah was no longer the same person. Mrs. Henderson had completely changed her. Her eyes that used to look with love were now cold and distant. At the beginning of January, Sarah filed for divorce in court. This was a huge shock, but now it was inevitable. Mrs. Henderson had won. Or so she thought. Sarah didn't even want to talk to me anymore. We were only communicating through lawyers. Mrs. Henderson's behavior during this process was very interesting. She still spoke to me politely. She acted as if she hadn't done anything. But there was a gleam of victory in her eyes. She knew her plan was successful. She had completely won Sarah over to her side. What Mrs. Henderson didn't know was that I had been recording her every move for 6 months. The security cameras had recorded all the lies she told Sarah. I had all the details of Mrs. Henderson's plan to end my marriage. Now it was time to show the truth to Sarah. In February, I organized and edited the recordings and showed them to Sarah. Sarah didn't want to watch at first. She didn't want to hear anything against her mother. But I insisted and she finally agreed to watch. While watching the footage recorded by the cameras, she slowly began to be shocked. She saw that Mrs. Henderson had systematically lied to her for 6 months. She understood that I hadn't done anything bad. When she saw how Mrs. Henderson planned to separate us and how she manipulated, she started crying. She realized how her mother had betrayed her. After Sarah watched the recordings, she cried for a very long time. When she realized that she had trusted the wrong person for 6 months and accused me unfairly, she was very sorry. Seeing that Mrs. Henderson had systematically sabotaged our marriage deeply shook her. She didn't expect such betrayal from her mother. Sarah immediately withdrew the divorce case. She called her lawyer and asked for the case to be canceled. Then she confronted Mrs. Henderson and asked her to leave the house. Mrs. Henderson initially denied it, but the video recordings proved everything. She was caught and had nothing left to hide. Mrs. Henderson left the house that evening. She packed her belongings and returned to Sacramento. Sarah didn't want to talk to her. The exposure of her 6-month plan was a big defeat for Mrs. Henderson. She had lost her daughter and no longer had a place in our lives. Sarah and I began rebuilding our marriage. The damage Mrs. Henderson caused was great, but our love overcame everything. Sarah was very sorry and made great efforts to regain my trust. I also forgave her because Mrs. Henderson had manipulated her very skillfully. In March, Sarah completely cut off communication with Mrs. Henderson. She blocked her phone number and removed her from social media. She couldn't forget Mrs. Henderson's plan to end our marriage. The punishment for such a great betrayal was social isolation. Mrs. Henderson lost her daughter and was condemned to loneliness. Sarah and I started going to a marriage counselor. Dr. Martinez was a very experienced therapist. We wanted to completely heal the damage Mrs. Henderson had caused. The counselor said we fundamentally had a strong relationship. Mrs. Henderson's manipulations had temporarily caused damage but hadn't destroyed the foundation. The therapy process lasted 6 months. Sarah worked very hard to resolve trust issues. It took time to completely erase Mrs. Henderson's effects. I was also patient and supported Sarah. We slowly regained our good old days. In April, the atmosphere of our house completely changed. With Mrs. Henderson's departure, the house became peaceful again. Sarah found her old cheerful self. Her smile returned and she started being close to me again. I could also breathe easily. I no longer needed to be constantly on guard. In May, Sarah became pregnant again. This was a new beginning for us. Mrs. Henderson's shadow was left behind, and we focused on the future. We started preparing a healthy family environment for our child. We were sure we would stay away from Mrs. Henderson's poisonous effect. In July, our son was born. We named him Matthew. Sarah's maternal instincts were very strong. I also loved the role of fatherhood very much. Matthew became a new source of hope and joy for us. Mrs. Henderson's plan had failed, and we had emerged as a stronger family. Mrs. Henderson never got to see Matthew. Sarah was absolutely determined about this. She was worried that Mrs. Henderson might harm her grandson. I also supported this decision. Mrs. Henderson's manipulative character could pose a danger to our child. In August, Mrs. Henderson tried to write a letter to Sarah. She wanted to reconnect by apologizing, but Sarah tore the letter without reading it. It was impossible to forgive what Mrs. Henderson had done. Once trust is broken, it's very hard to regain. Today, Sarah and I live a happy life in Phoenix. Matthew is now 9 months old and growing very healthy. Mrs. Henderson's 6-month plan ultimately failed. Thanks to security cameras, the truth came out and justice prevailed. Sarah saw her mother's true face and made the right decision. Mrs. Henderson now lives alone in Sacramento. Her communication with Sarah has been completely cut off. While trying to end our marriage, she lost her own daughter. She lives with the regret this situation brought her. The failure of her plan was a great disappointment. This incident taught me a lot. Manipulations within the family can be very dangerous. They can easily poison trust relationship, but the truth comes out sooner or later. Thanks to technology, I exposed Mrs. Henderson's plan and saved my marriage. Sarah now knows how harmful her mother is. We will never allow Mrs. Henderson to enter our lives again. Creating a safe environment for Matthew is our priority. We will stay away from Mrs. Henderson's poisonous effects and continue to live as a happy family.